How's that?
Good morning and welcome to the House Environment Committee. We are going to continue talking about S325 and we have, it was a committee bill, but the bill sponsor is welcoming Senator Watson.
Sure. Good morning. Well, thank you for having me. So S325 passed out of committee on I'm just going to start with the end, I suppose. It was passed out of committee on a 5-0 vote. And there were some controversies along the way, but ultimately on third reading, it passed unanimously on a voice vote. So that was very encouraging. I do have a handout for folks if that is useful. This is part, I'm sorry, let me break this in half. It is, this is a part of a handout that I passed out on the Senate floor to help explain what S325 does. So this has been slightly modified. The main feature of S325 is that it delays some of the important deadlines that are in Act 181 and specifically extends the interim exemptions, of which there are many flavors. And it pushes out the implementation of the road rule and the Tier 3. It also makes some adjustments to how Tier 1 aspects are rolling out. For example, made it so that the municipalities, when they adopt a Tier 1 area, they don't have to automatically adopt the enforcement of all of the Act 250 permits that are in that area. They just take them over one at a time as they come up for amendment sort of organically. So it's a sort of slower transition of them taking over those. There were some other, I would say, smoothing out some bumps. Again, with the rollout, there was one thing I'll point out. There was an extra word that Tier 1A areas would have to have ordinances that covered sensitive communities, rare species, and threatened and endangered species. And those threatened and endangered is a term of art. Sensitive communities is a term of art, but rare was not. So we removed the word rare because that would be above and beyond what Act 250 does. So there were things like that that were intended to, again, smooth the way there. In Tier 3, we made it so that the Land Use Review Board had the ability to apply less than all of Act 250 to the road rule or to Tier 3. So making it clear that they could just apply the parts that perhaps made sense. So there's a you can read through the list there. Those are some of the highlights of things that the bill does. I'm happy to talk more through any of those points if that's useful. But then I do want to point out that there were a couple of floor amendments that don't show up in here in this list. These were amendments that were brought to the committee and by folks who were not on the committee, and we were able to find resolution. I would have said normally, if we had 3 weeks, we could figure this out. And fantastically, we were able to figure it out within like 48 hours. So that was, I think, very encouraging. And those two amendments both pertain to interim exemptions. And so they were about, our legislative council can help explain that, but it's in terms of building more housing in village centers, priority housing projects and housing in general. There are just a couple of flags that I want to raise for you. As I was preparing the floor report, I did notice that there's it's slightly more than a typo, but I think it's something that we did not intend. I'm just going to tell you, page 20, section 12, there's a phrase water or before water or wastewater that is illogical because it has to do with soils. The water to an area doesn't make sense. So just flagging that. And then I also want to flag one of the suggestions that came to us had to do with smart growth principles. So the smart growth principles lived elsewhere or does live elsewhere in statute. But this 325 brings smart growth principles into the chapter on the elements of maps or the future land use maps. One of the suggestions that came to us that we put off was that there could be potentially an additional item added to the smart growth principles having to do with flood resilience. So just put that on the radar of things to potentially consider. And then other things that I guess I would say that's it from me as the chair of Senate Natural Resources. Speaking just as a individual senator now, not speaking for the group, I would flag that we did not hear from the Land Access Opportunity Board. Recommend that it may be worth hearing from them. They have some suggestions, particularly I think around the process of hearing feedback, and as well as I think they have some legislation that they were interested in. I would also, again, speaking just as a legislator and not as the chair, I think it may be useful to have someone, it doesn't have to be the Land Use Review Board, but someone look at potential overlays of current use maps together with Tier 3 and conservation maps together with Tier 3. I think that would be useful information. So with that, there's one other thing that I would point out. This was data that we received from the Federal Reserve that and I'm happy to send this to you digitally, but this is housing permits over time, over the last 10 years. And you can see sort of the average of how many housing permits were filed per month. And then Act 181 goes into effect here, and you can see the couple of spikes afterwards. So the average is quite a bit higher after Act 181 goes into effect specifically for Vermont housing permits, which I find encouraging. Happy to talk through any of the bullet points there. I realize I'm going relatively quickly. But if you have anything questions or anything I can help further explain, happy to.
Okay, I want a couple questions, and then we haven't done a walkthrough, so I want to make sure that we're gonna walk through with Ledge Council. We don't need the legal questions for the senator. We need other relevant questions because we're going to shift gears quite quickly to walking through the bill. So we're so we all understand what's really detailed in it. So, okay. Representative Pritchard.
Thank you. On the digital graph that you're presenting, is there a way to know with that like what the breakdown is relating that to Tier 1?
This is Federal Reserve data, so I am not sure that we have that, but that's a good question. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm here on S325 as passed by the Senate. S325 was a committee bill that was originally called an act relating to a study on the creation of model bylaws. They took that bill, they stripped it of everything that was in it and turned it into an act relating to regional planning and Act 250 tier jurisdiction. So on page 1, section 1, there is an intent section. The General Assembly finds that 2024 Acts and Resolve number 181, Act 181, represented a substantial reconstructing of Vermont's land use review framework. This act is intended to provide technical clarification, transitional certainty, and implementation alignment consistent with the intent of Act 181 and without altering its underlying policy goals. Section 2 starts with the amendments to Act 250. So first, Section 2 is amending 6001-3, which is the section that has the jurisdictional triggers in it. And the first change is to Romanet 12, and it's the construction of private roads jurisdictional trigger. And so you will see at the top of page 2 that for this jurisdictional trigger, for the purpose of determining the length of any road and associated driveways, the length of all other roads and driveways within the tract of land constructed after. Currently, the law says July 1, 2026. That's being extended to January 1, 2030 shall be included. So this is saying that roads constructed after January 1, 2030 will trigger an Act 250 permit if it meets the rest of the qualifications of this section. So this jurisdictional trigger was set to start in July of this year. It's being pushed out.
Going, we got 26
Okay,
pages.
okay. So at the bottom of page, the next part of page 2, this next jurisdictional trigger is for priority housing projects. So the interim exemption for priority housing projects removes any cap on the number of priority housing projects that can be built. And currently that date is until January 1, 2027. It's being extended to January 1, 2028. And these are for priority housing projects, meaning that at least 20% of the units have to be affordable as defined. And those are within downtowns, neighborhood development areas, or growth centers, and within 1/2 mile around those designated areas with permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws served by public sewer or water services or have adequate soils. There's additional language added to this section at the top of page 3. And this is language that is currently in the other interim exemptions that we'll talk about. It adds that this exemption shall not apply to areas within mapped river corridors and floodplains, except those areas containing pre-existing development in areas suitable for infill development as defined in 29-201 of the Vermont Flood Hazard Area and River Corridor Rule. So this language does appear other places in statute, and it appears in all the other interim exemptions. And so it was proposed to be added here as part of the priority housing project to say you should not build priority housing projects under this exemption if they're in the river corridor or floodplain, unless they've been identified as suitable for pre-existing development in ANR's rule.
It doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand this.
Okay, Ellen, would you try to explain it again?
No, I'm just the infill. I don't understand. Does that mean people can build in a floodplain?
If it meets the definition of suitable for infill as defined in ANR's rule. So there is language in their rule defining what is suitable for infill in a flood hazard area.
Yeah, this is.
I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me, but.
Well, there's the history there is that folks who are on this committee generally stumble on this,
Okay.
and that other committees really want this. So I think that this is, you know, when you sit here and learn about the risks of doing that,
Mhm.
you realize maybe that's not a great idea, but other people disagree.
But just who pays for it? That's the thing. I don't care if you want to build in a floodplain. I just don't want to pay for it.
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
I
that's
think
the concern. I
that
don't want Vermonters to have to.
these are areas that are already developed. And so, yeah, I get it. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Next is section 3 on page 3. This is amending the definition of priority housing project that is in Act 250. So there is this interim exemption that's being created that has been created for priority housing projects. But the definition of priority housing project that has existed since at least 2010 is tied to designated areas. And those designated areas under Act 181 are transitioning from designated downtowns to now the centers and neighborhoods. And so you should think about, and I think the Senate Natural Resources Committee started thinking about if that definition needs to be updated to reflect those designations that are going away. And so they've added language here to reference tier 3. So a priority housing project means a discrete project located on a single tract or multiple contiguous tracts of land that consists exclusively of mixed income housing or mixed use or any combination thereof, and is located entirely within a designated downtown development district, new town center, growth center, or neighborhood development area under Chapter 76A, which is being phased out, or within an area mapped and approved by the board, so the Land Use Review Board, as eligible for Tier 1B area status and is not currently approved for Tier 1B area status under Section 6033. So the Senate committee was looking to have this be an option for where priority housing projects allow for a number of units to be exempt under Act 250 if they have mixed income housing. It needs to have at least 20% of the units be mixed income and affordable. So they're also adding that now if it's an area would be eligible for Tier B, Tier 1B, but is not Tier 1B, priority housing projects could be built there.
This was an amendment, or were this in the bill as passed the Senate?
This came out of Senate Natural.
Representative Zachowitz.
So would this mean then that, so this would be permanently in statute, and so communities that opt not to enter into 1B would still
Be entered.
sort of for these particular kinds of housing projects?
Yes.
Further meaning that they would be exempt from getting an Act 250 permit, regardless of whether the municipality had adequate or adequately, but regardless of whether the LURB had deemed the municipality had adequate zoning and planning.
No. It says mapped and approved by the board as eligible. So I do think you should ask the board what they think that means. Yeah, I think it is more about that the town itself has not opted in, even though they're eligible. But this is a new concept that's being introduced.
Representative North and then Morris.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand why the and is not currently approved. Is there any place that's already currently approved for Tier 1B? I thought you were still working through that.
No, but this is a permanent statute, so it won't go into effect until later this year.
Representative Morris.
Madam Chair. So there are areas outside tier proposed, tier A1B, haven't been approved yet. Could include tier 2 communities that aren't approved for tier 1B yet.
I don't know.
That open up tier 2 for possible development in the same statute?
So I,
Can't be two tiers at once, I don't think.
yeah, I think,
You can.
But they're not currently approved.
let's pretend it's 6 months from now, when this law will be in effect. There is a question about if towns 5 years from now want to be Tier 1B and they haven't become one yet. I think there has been discussions about an area that could be Tier 1B, but the town hasn't agreed, hasn't opted in. So if it hasn't opted in, it would be a Tier 2 area. I do also think you should discuss what role priority housing projects will have moving forward if there are exemptions for non-affordable housing throughout the state, but you're kind of eliminating this definition of priority housing project. So what will priority housing project, meaning affordable housing, mean, and where should those be once the tiers take effect? Because priority housing projects may go away if you don't change this definition at all.
Yeah. Why didn't they change it?
I don't know.
Moving on.
Section 4 is amending the exemption section for Act 250, 6081. So, on, at the bottom of page 3, that's just a small sort of grammar change. But the first change is on the bottom of page 4. So the bottom of page 4, this is an exemption that was created under the Home Act, so before Act 181, until, it currently says July 1, 2028, but pushing it out to January 1, 2030. No permit or permit amendment is required for the construction of one accessory dwelling unit within or pertinent to a single-family dwelling. Units constructed here should not count towards other totals. So this is an ADU exemption that's being pushed out until January 1, 2030. And then similarly, at the top of page 5, this is also from the Home Act. Until July 1, 2028 is being changed again until January 1, 2030. No, and then this exemption currently says no permit amendment is required for the construction of improvements for converting a structure used for commercial purpose into 29 or fewer units of housing. So this predates the other existing interim housing exemptions. And this is a proposal to say not only is it no permit amendment needed, no permit amendment or permit is needed for converting a commercial building into 29 units or fewer of housing.
But also commercial development. They're adding that.
No, it's the change here was that no permit or permit amendment was needed. This was more narrow previously for things that had already had an Act 250 permit but wanted to convert.
Sorry, I was on page 5.
Okay, yes, sorry. Yeah. And then on page 5, DD starts with the changes to the interim housing exemptions that were in Act 181. So they're being moved out until January 1, 2030. Previously, the dates were not all the same, but they were in 2027. So the first one is for, so the first one is related to new town centers, growth centers, and neighborhood development areas. So until January 1, 2030, no permit or permit amendment is required for the subdivision for or the construction of housing projects such as cooperatives, condominiums, dwellings, or mobile homes, and mixed-use development with 75 units or fewer, and then located in a new town center, growth center, or designated development area, served by public sewer or water services or soil that are adequate for the disposal of wastewater. And then this shall not count towards other totals. And then here's the language again that was added to the PHPs about shall not be within a Mac River corridor area unless suitable for infill. So the language that's in this one is also in the next interim exemption. The date is changing, and then it's also an exemption for the subdivision for the construction of housing. So subdivision permits also sometimes trigger Act 250. And then, yes, it is also adding mixed use development that can be exempt as part of this as well.
Specific to tier 1.
This is not, no, this is not tier 1. This is an interim exemption. So it currently uses the language of the existing statute, not the tiers. We're talking about new town centers, growth centers, and neighborhood development areas.
It might be a good time to just say that one of the transitions that are happening with Act 181 is that we had started using the ACCD program designations for land use. And this Act 181 is trying to separate those two, because those were primarily like for tax incentives and just like a historic preservation, like a different thing. So that's what we're hitting on these the definitions of the areas that we're talking about.
And some of them will potentially correlate to what becomes tier 1 because they are sort of the core areas, but not specifically tier 1. So the same language is added to the next exemption, which is at the bottom of page 5. And this is for 50 units of housing. So until January 1, 2030, no permit or permit amendment is required for the subdivision 4 or the construction of housing and mixed use development with 50 units or fewer. Onto page 6, and then they're striking constructed or maintained on a tract of tract or land 10 acres or less and located entirely within a designated village center and within a quarter mile of its boundary and with permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws and served by sewer, water, or adequate soils. So the language at the top of page 6 that's being struck was one of the floor amendments. So currently, this is an exemption for up to 50 units of housing in and around a designated village center that has zoning and wastewater disposal available if they're located on a tract or tract of land that's 10 acres or less. So it's getting rid of their the requirement that it be located on 10 acres or less so that it could be on any size parcel.
Oh, that seems kind of not in line with the rest of goals. But we'll talk about that later.
And then this is also the exemption for for urbanized areas with 50,000 residents and within 1/4 mile of a transit route. So that's again 50 units of housing. They're not changing specifically that one, but the 10 acres or less requirement would apply to that as well.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Sure. So subdivision 2 in the interim exemption is for 50 units of housing currently on 10 acres or less. And there's a choice. It's either in a designated village center with zoning and disposal or within an urbanized area with 50,000 residents and within 1/4 mile of a transit route. Those areas are also allowed to have exemption of up to 50 units of housing on 10 acres. And next, on page 6, the next interim exemption is the one for downtowns. And so there's no cap on the number of units that are exempt under this one. And so it's until January 1, 2030, no permit or permit amendment is required for the subdivision 4 or the construction of housing and mixed-use development on a tract or tract of land located within a designated downtown with permanent zoning, subdivision bylaws, public water, sewer, or soils.
Representative Sacraments.
Would you remind us the definition of a mixed use development?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Larry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I asked Ellen if she would remind us of the definition of a mixed use
Oh.
development.
The construction of both mixed income housing and construction of space for any combination of retail, office, services, artisan, and recreational community facilities, provided that at least 40% of the gross floor area of the building involved is mixed income housing. Mixed use does not include industrial use. So there needs to be at least 40% devoted to housing, and it's mixed income housing, which means that at least 20% of the housing units meet the requirements of affordable and for at least 15 years. So it is the definition of affordable. So mixed use does include affordable housing, but it can be up to 60% commercial business.
And we had a lot of debate of, and did we land on square footage being the 40%?
Gross floor area. I think so, yeah.
Gross floor, thank you.
Yeah.
Minus certain kinds of spaces like storage and I can't remember what it was.
Yeah.
There were a couple of exceptions that were not included in the floor space,
Yeah.
gymnasiums.
Yeah, okay. Representative
Yeah,
Austin.
so affordable is 30% of someone's income, gross income. Is that how we're?
cannot exceed 30% of the gross annual income at 120% of the highest of the following: county median income, area median income, statewide median income. So yes, 30% of 120 of area median income. Okay. So then on page 7, subdivision 4 is added as a new interim housing exemption, and this was one of the floor amendments. So notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, until January 1, 2030, no permit or permit amendment is required for the subdivision 4 or the construction of 50 units or fewer of housing, with at least 20% of the units with mixed income housing or mixed use development constructed or maintained on a tract or tracts of land located within areas of a designated village center and within 1/4 mile of its boundaries served by public sewer or water services or soil that are adequate for wastewater disposal. So I wrote this on the Senate floor. I don't know if it needs to be rewritten grammatically, I think.
What is it doing?
It is attempting to create priority housing projects for village centers because village centers are not eligible currently for priority housing projects. So in a village center and then within 1/4 mile around it, affordable housing can be built and be exempt from Act 250 as long as it's mixed income housing or mixed use development, which is affordable housing.
Do you know if there's instances where village centers are in towns that don't have zoning and subdivision bylaws?
Sorry, can you say that again?
I can ask the planner. We have planners here today, so we'll keep going.
Yeah. So yes, this is the distinction between the prior interim exemption. There's no requirement here for zoning. Okay,
Yes.
Ellen, did the Senate take any testimony, when we talk about 20% of the units with mixed income housing, did they take any testimony that could be detrimental to some communities or some projects not expanding,
Not what?
not being developed?
We didn't take testimony in this amendment at all.
I suspect there may have been committee discussion when I was not there. I don't. I think they possibly discussed it when I wasn't there, but I don't know.
I understand,
Yeah.
you know, what we're trying to accomplish. My point is, you know, if there are any projects out there that would not move forward if they had that.
All right, so that ends the interim exemptions. Section 5 starts with tier 3. This is the rulemaking directive to the Land Use Review Board on tier 3. So page 7, section 5, this is from Act 181. The Land Use Review Board in consultation with ANR shall adopt rules to implement the requirements of tier 3. It is the intent of the General Assembly that these rules identify critical natural resources for protection. The board shall review the definition of tier 3 area, determine the critical natural resources that shall be included in tier 3, giving due consideration to river corridors, headwater streams, habitat connectors of statewide significance, riparian areas, Class A waters, and natural communities. They shall determine any additional critical natural resources that should be added to the definition onto page 8. Include any measures to ensure that no municipality or region is disproportionately impacted by tier 3 designation that would limit reasonable opportunities for tier 1 or tier 2 designations. Determine which and under what circumstances criteria under Act 250, 6086, criteria 1 through 10 should be part of tier 3 area review, and determine how to define the boundaries. So the tier 3 rulemaking development is already underway. You gave them a list of critical natural resources to look at first. And the Senate is proposing to, the next subdivision under this pushes out the deadline for those rules. Currently, it's February 1, 2026, which has already passed. This is pushing it out to June 30th, 2028. But they've also added to the Senate Natural Resources has added to the list of things to go into the rulemaking to determine which and under what circumstances criteria should be part of Tier 3 area review. So additionally, farther down on page 8, Section 6 amends the Land Use Review Board's rulemaking authority. So consistent with the intent of the subdivision 3A12 is the road construction jurisdiction and the Tier 3 rulemaking requirements. The board shall have authority to adopt rules establishing a process to limit the criteria that would apply to road development pursuant to the jurisdictional trigger and development within Tier 3 areas. The rule shall define which criteria will be reviewed and under what circumstances. So the Senate Natural Resources Committee has amended the Land Use Review Board's existing statutory rulemaking authority to give them the authority to use fewer criteria when doing review for road rule projects and projects in Tier 3. This is a change from how Act 250 has worked in the past. Previously, there hasn't been this distinction between what criteria apply to what project. All criteria apply to all projects. If something isn't relevant to a site, they just need to say in their application, we do not have any earth minerals to be extracted on this site. That's an example of so we don't need to address that in our application. But this is changing that so that for Tier 3 and the road construction, different, fewer criteria can be applied to projects. And then that goes with the prior section, which is asking them to identify it as part of the rulemaking, what the criteria will be. All right, page 9, section 7. This is amending the effective date section from Act 181. On line 7 on page 9, section 12 and section 13. So section 13 is the new criterion 8C, forest blocks and habitat connectors. And section 12 are the definitions of those things. So they go together, the definitions for criterion 8C. The current effective date for those are December 31st, 2026. Those are being pushed out to January 1, 2028. So a year for criterion 8C to start being used. And then on line 9, section 21, which is the definitions of Tier 2 and Tier 3, those shall take effect and so start being used June 30th, 2028. And then section 19, which is the road construction jurisdiction, is being pushed out to January 1, 2030.
Wasn't that already done in the beginning? Why is it in here twice?
So these are two different things. The effective date of something is when the law and therefore the need for a permit triggers. In the road rule, you also have this implementation. So which roads qualify or would trigger Act 250 jurisdiction. And so it's saying roads constructed after January 1, 2030. These two dates could be different. In this bill, they are the same. But it's identifying in statute that roads built prior to January 1, 2030 wouldn't trigger the need for a permit. Like you could make section 19 on passage and then under the statute of implementing, it wouldn't trigger the need for a permit until after that. You could do either. Section 8 is amending 10 VSA 6034, which is the Tier 1A area statute. And you heard from Senator Watson, this is a change that was proposed by ANR. So under the requirements for what a town needs to have in their zoning to qualify for tier 1A. At the top of page 10, the municipality has identified and planned for the maintenance of significant natural communities, and it's striking rare, threatened and endangered species located in the tier 1A area or excluded from those areas. So A&R testified that they did not think rare made sense in this context.
That was a. Was that a? Oh, no, I see. Yeah.
All right. Section 9 also relates to tier 1A. So this is about what towns do once they become tier 1A. There is a requirement in the statute in 4460G that when the municipality is tier 1A, if there's already an existing Act 250 permit on a site, if the permit is going to be, if that same parcel that already has an Act 250 permit is applying for a municipal zoning permit, the municipality shall go through the existing Act 250 permit conditions and bring them into the municipal permit so that the Act 250 permit will not be enforced by the municipality because in tier 1A, there's an exemption, but the municipality will take over enforcing those conditions. And so apparently that was not fully clear. So it now reads starting on line 14, the appropriate municipal panel reviewing a municipal permit or permit amendment pursuant to this subsection shall include conditions contained within a permit previously issued under Act 250 so that the conditions may be enforced as part of the municipal permit unless the panel determines that the permit conditions pertain to any of the following. And it has a list of types of conditions that do not need to be part of the municipal permit, largely under these criteria that they're out of date or no longer relate to what is going to happen at the site. So Act 250 has permit conditions on the site. Now that there will be an exemption from Act 250 jurisdiction, the municipality needs to pull in any relevant criteria into the municipal permit so that they can then enforce it instead of having the land use review board enforce it. That was the proposal under Act 181. A change is made further down in the statute as well.
Representative Pritchard.
Thank you. Ellen, on page 10, can you just give me an example where it says the municipality is plan for the maintenance of significant natural communities? What does maintenance mean? Well, I mean, what would that describe?
So, no, I cannot off the top of my head. I think you could hear testimony about that.
Just seems funny to put that word in.
So on page 12, still in this section, subsection H is being struck. Because what the initial proposal out of Act 181 was that in tier 1A areas, there would be no Act 250 jurisdiction, including enforcement. And so this bill is proposing to change that. So it's striking the language that said within a tier 1A area, the municipal panel shall enforce any existing Act 250 permits that haven't had its permit conditions transferred to a municipal permit. So that's being struck. And also the authority for the Agency of Natural Resources and the Land Use Review Board to enforce those permits is being restored. So the municipality is only in charge of enforcing their own permits. When a permit is being amended by the municipality, its Act 250 conditions will transfer into the municipal permit so that the municipality can enforce them. And then existing Act 250 permits within tier 1A area will still be subject to enforcement by the state agencies. Section 10 is a report. On or before January 15, 2027, the Department of Housing and Community Development, after consultation with the League of Cities and Towns, Let's Build Homes, BNRC, and the Vermont Planners Association shall report to the General Assembly on recommendations for how to reduce the negative impacts of discretionary review of residential development. The department shall consider the following: whether the state should establish a Vermont model code to assist municipalities seeking to replace discretionary review with clear and objective standards, the potential value of the federal right to build zone legislation, and steps the state can take to maximize that value, incentives and planning assistance the state can offer municipalities seeking to limit discretionary review. On to page 13. The report shall also include a status update on the 802 Homes pilot program and recommendations for how to improve the efficiency of appeals of municipal zoning permits for housing. And the report shall be submitted to the Committees on Environment and General and Housing, and then the Senate Economic Development Committee and Natural Resources Committee.
What does discretionary review mean in this context?
In municipal zoning, our statutes do not phrase it this way, but there's a concept broadly of by right review, by right zoning and discretionary review, which we, I think, generally here think of as conditional use review. And so the opposite of that is form-based code in zoning, which does not have discretion at the panel level. So if a town adopts form-based code and a building is being proposed to meet that code, there isn't a discretionary review. There's just an okay for a permit application. And so this is about looking at the way Vermont municipalities and their zoning review residential development, and if there should be a change to a model code or a model code established that towns could adopt.
Representative Tyler Review.
Can you tell us what federal right to build zone legislation is?
Only very high level. There is a bill at the federal level about the right to build zones, where I think there would be, I can't say more than that. I just know that it's federal legislation that isn't law currently. All right, so page 13 starts with some amendments related to the regional planning process. So this language is proposing a new process for regional plan amendments. So section 11 is amending 24 VSA 4348, adoption and amendment of regional plans. First, it's adding that the Land Use Review Board shall coordinate with the state agencies and the Community Investment Board. So 60 days prior to holding the first public hearing on a regional plan adoption, the RPC shall submit a draft regional plan to the Land Use Review Board for review and comments related to conformance with 4302 and 4348A. And chapter 139, which is the Community Investment Program, which is what is the successor program to the Downtown Designation Program. And so it's adding that the board shall coordinate with the state agencies and the Community Investment Board because their work is related to these designated areas, and then respond within 60 days. The RPC shall hold 2 or more public hearings within the region after public notice on any proposed plan. And then on to page 14, and it's striking amendment because they're going to create a new amendment review process further down in this section. And so it strikes on page 14 the references to amendment. And so these requirements here about the public hearings and the notice requirements are only going to be for the plan readoption, which would happen every 8 years. And I can read through that if you'd like, but the next change is not until page 16. So, and I did just want to flag, there already exists in the statute subdivision J, which is the process for a minor amendment to a regional plan. And what is being proposed on page 16 is the procedure for non-minor amendments.
Like Colchester is now starting off our town plan. How is that going to be impacted if the regional plan, a different direction? Or will it?
I don't think it will be.
It won't be.
This
Something
is
we should be considering in terms of the town plan.
not here.
Okay.
So on page 16, subdivision N, regional plan amendments, non-minor future land use map amendments, and tier 1B area status requests. So regional plans may be reviewed from time to time and may be amended in light of new developments or changed conditions affecting the region. Non-minor future land use maps amendment shall be processed as part of a regional plan amendment. Tier 1B area status requests may be made separate from the regional plan approval or amendment process. To amend a regional plan, oh, I guess I'll just flag. It says that they can be made separate from the approval or amendment process. And I'm not in, there's only one other mention about that later in here. So I kind of suspect more detail might be needed on this, but I might be wrong. So at the bottom of page 16, line 15, to amend a regional plan, which may include non-minor future land use map amendment, a regional planning commission shall hold one public hearing. For general adoption is currently 2 public hearing requirement. At least 15 days in advance of the hearing, the RPC shall provide notices of the public hearing to parties listed in subdivision D1 and the Land Use Review Board. The public hearing notice shall include a description of the changes to the plan. Onto page 17, including non-minor amendments to future land use map or any changes to tier 1B area status. After adoption of the regional plan amendment, the Regional Planning Commission shall submit a request to the Land Use Review Board for affirmative determination of regional plan compliance for the regional plan amendment. Standalone requests for tier 1B area status shall be submitted to the Land Use Review Board after the public hearing required under subdivision A. The Land Use Review Board shall hold a public hearing within 30 days after receiving the request for an affirmative determination of regional plan amendment compliance or approval for tier 1B area status. The board shall issue its determination within 30 days after the hearing. Adoption of a regional plan amendment, non-minor future land use map amendment or tier 1B area status or amendment shall not change the expiration date of the regional plan. Maybe that works fine.
Representative,
Thanks. Are minor and non-minor, those terms, are they defined or is that something rules are getting?
So in the definition of, so on page 16, it does say that the Land Use Review Board may adopt rules to implement the minor amendment process for RPCs.
Okay.
And it says that minor amendments include any change consisting of fewer than 10 acres. So there's an implication that that means anything larger than 10 acres would be a non-minor.
Okay.
But they do have some rulemaking authority on this. Yeah.
Hey,
Representative Tagliavia.
Non-minor and minor. It seems like they were avoiding word major. Why?
You can ask the RPCs, they proposed this. Section 12 is amending the elements of the regional plan. And so these are the land use categories. So on page 18, subdivision 12 establishes, sets out what the land use categories are going to be. And it adds a reference that they will be consistent with the smart growth principles of 43 of this chapter. And that's so that the smart growth principles will apply to all of the land use categories, because previously it was listed in some of the categories and not in all of them. So it's being brought up to the top. So all the categories shall comply with the smart growth principles. And the smart growth principles are further in this bill if you'd like to look at them. But they do already exist. They're in chapter 76A. But they're being added somewhere else as well. So then on page 18, for the downtown or village center land use category, it's adding that municipalities may have more than one center, including planned, new or emerging centers that anchor planned growth or village areas. And it's
Kind of Chapin.
Does that change something or just make it clear that that was already a possibility?
I think it is to make clear because previously it didn't say anything related to that. It's also adding language at the top of page 19. It is the intent that most towns in Vermont have at least one village center in which additional housing units are supported.
Very technical terms. It's just intended, dude.
Sorry. Representative Chapin.
I mean, I think
Is that, what,
it's
can I ask?
making a
can I ask-
suggestion to people who make these maps.
Yeah, we're gonna explore
Okay.
this idea of.
The next category is planned growth areas. It's striking from this category reference to new town centers, downtowns, village centers. Previously designated under chapter 76A. And then it's also striking that the areas meet generally the smart growth principles, but that's because it's moved up to the beginning of the chapter, the beginning of this section.
Representative Norris.
In these sections, we're still talking about these, using these terms, village center, downtown center. I thought we were trying to get away from that and separate those terms from the tier 1A, tier 1B, but still, we're adding them in here.
That's because this is an entirely different section. So the state designation program did use similar terms as the regional plans, which is pretty confusing. And so
Validating my confusion.
there's a lot of confusion, I think, in the designation program generally. And the fact that they use the same terms as this is, I think, confusing. Yes. So these are the regional plan land use categories, and they are different than being a designated area.
Those things. Obviously, plans are supposed to inform state level plans, right? So they interact,
So
feed one another.
Yes, so in chapter 139, which is the successor to chapter 76A, the designation program, the areas eligible to receive a designation and therefore additional incentives, including tax credits. You do look first at the regional plan mapped area of what it is mapped as, and then there are additional requirements for those areas to become a designated area. And you probably should spend time looking at this because this program is starting to, the new designation program is starting to get underway. And I do think there's a few amendments in here because there have been some inconsistent use of terms. I have to go. I want to flag also that the House last week voted out H940, which was the miscellaneous bill that came out of House Energy. And that bill amends the section we were just talking about on regional plans about clarifying the process for enhanced energy planning at the regional plan level. And so it amends the same section as this bill is amending. And so you may want to consider and make sure that any changes you make will line up with those changes.
Mhm. All right, it's conceivable we could finish this walkthrough this afternoon if you're available.
I am available.
Remind me one more time, what were the two, the RPC, are they designations or are designations at the state level? One was designations and the other one had a different term.
The land use map categories, those are what the regional planning commission includes in their plan, are the land use categories. And then the state designates areas for incentives.
So is your schedule open this afternoon?
Yes.
Okay, we will schedule a time to walk through the rest of this with you this afternoon. Thank you, Ellen. Members, let's take a break until 10 minutes past the hour, being very aware of time because